Josh Hennig, Deshaun Hendricks, Hunter Brody filling in for Mike Gill and the gang here on the Sports Badge with 97.3 ESPN TGIF Friday, 4 o'clock. You know what that means. John McMullen joins us on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Talk Eagles, talk the Giants matchup this Sunday. Of course, you hear John as well on the Countdown to Kickoff show with Tony Bruno this Sunday here on 97.3 ESPN. John, is it fair to say that the highlight of your football weekend will be knowing that there will not be a Monday night Countdown to Kickoff where you have to almost have a heart attack arguing with Billy Schwein?
Schweimer's a good guy. He just
I didn't say he wasn't a good guy.
He gets caught up in his fandom. Let's put it that way.
All right, John, let's get to the news at hand. The Eagles released the injury report today. Zach Ertz out. Aguilar is out. It feels like all along that was going to be that. You were saying all week you expected Zach Ertz to be out. My question for you, though, is that with Ertz out, what do you expect the Eagles to do in terms of personnel and formations?
Well, it makes it more difficult. I think the first indication that Zach wasn't going to be able to play was the reemergence of Richard Rodgers as a veteran tight end option. So you can start to use those 12 personnel looks, and you have Dallas Goedert sort of in the Zach Ertz role, and then Richard Rodgers would take in the inline role. So I think that was part of it. But obviously it's not going to be as effective. I think if you saw what happened in the Dallas game, it's what it's going to be, and the fact that even though Zach was able to return and finish that game, Dallas had to sort of take over the number one tight end role as the receiving threat. Problem is the Cowboys, that was an in-game injury. So the Cowboys didn't prepare for that. The Giants know and were well aware that Zach was unlikely Zach Ertz was going to be able to play. So they can game plan with the knowledge that Dallas Goedert is going to be the top receiving threat, and not only a tight end because of the receiver issues, he's the top receiving threat. So it's easier when you get the game plan for it, so the Giants should be better prepared. But the second part of that is the Giants aren't very good defensively, talent-wise, especially on the back seven. They're okay up front, but the back seven is probably bottom 5 in the league. So they might know it. They don't necessarily, even if they know it, doesn't mean they can stop it.
Another name on this list is Jalen Mills. He was limited in practice, and his game status is questionable. I know yesterday Ryan, myself, and Jeff Mosher was talking about the Sidney Jones or the Rasul Douglas situation. Well, if Jalen Mills doesn't go, now we're talking maybe both of them playing in this one.
Yeah, you might see them both. That's not a good situation.
That's very scary to think about.
Yeah, and that kind of cropped up on Thursday at practice when Jalen was sort of working off to the side. I do think, knowing him and knowing the questionable tag, he's going to try to play. So you kind of have to wait and see. That might be a game day type of thing. But, yeah, I mean, it's not good if you have to have both Rasul Douglas and Sidney Jones out there as starting corners and not have sort of the safety net. I kind of explained it didn't matter who started, who didn't start, as long as you have a short leash and you could use whoever was the hot hand, whoever was playing well. Well, now you might not have that option. And all of a sudden, if you have to lean on them both, and then there's other moving parts. If they fail, you might have to kick Avonte Maddox outside, and that would put Creban LeBlanc in the slot. Talk about a lot this year. The Eagles have a lot of corners, but they're not very good corners, and that's where they are, and that's one of the issues they've had defensively.
John, talk about Jordan Howard coming back now. Doug mentioned that he's not going to get a full workload. What do you anticipate his role being on Sunday, being away for so long and with Miles Sanders playing so well?
Yeah, Doug admitted he's going to be the third running back. So it's not only Miles Sanders, it's Boston Scott as well, who's earned his role. And Jordan Howard has been out for 7 weeks now. So I think people have to realize that. It's a long time. We're talking almost 2 months. So there's a conditioning aspect to it, which Doug also mentioned. So he wouldn't be capable of taking. Remember, when he left, he had just, in that Buffalo game, he set the record for most touches, most carries by running back in the Doug Peterson era. And then the Chicago game where he got hurt, he was at 20 touches when he got hurt. So he was handling the football a lot, especially when you look at how Doug typically likes to do it. He wouldn't be in that situation anyway because he's been out for almost 2 months, and the majority of that's 2 months until today, as a matter of fact, because he was cleared for contact after practice on Thursday. He was not cleared for contact. So not only has he been out, he hasn't taken a hit. He hasn't been allowed to even mix it up in a shells type environment where people are pushing. There's no live contact, obviously, this time of year in the NFL in practice, but nonetheless, you can bang around a little bit. He hasn't even been able to do that. So they're going to bring him along slowly, maybe short yardage, maybe things like that, but you might see 3-5 touches, no more than that.
John, talk about next. Obviously, if the Eagles win, they'll be in the playoffs. Do you expect that role to expand? And also guys like Ertz and Johnson, who, even though Johnson's questionable, I don't expect him to play this week. Do you expect that because it would be a playoff environment, a home game to where it's win or go home, would that all of a sudden, not saying that these guys aren't hurt, but would that push them to say, hey, we've got to put it all out there?
Well, it's win or go home now. So, and Doug has talked about that for a number of weeks. It's been that way. So they've in essence, in their mind, already started the playoffs. And guys haven't been able to go. And I go all the way back to the first time Doug kind of slipped early this week, which I mentioned on the show. And he said if everything goes to our plan, Zach will be ready next week, meaning the playoffs, if the Eagles make the playoffs. I wouldn't be so sure Lane Johnson is going to play against the Giants. He's getting closer. But the Eagles are very concerned with that injury. It's the second time he's had it. And then you add in the part that Vita's actually played pretty well and held up pretty well. And remember, if they put him out there against DeMarcus Lawrence, they'll have confidence to put him out there against the New York Giants. So I do expect both to be back if they make the playoffs. But that's not the reason why. If they were capable of going now, in the Eagles' minds, they would be out there.
John McMullen joining us at Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen for all your Eagles and NFL news and information. John, the guys mentioned Jalen Mills a little bit earlier. I wanted to ask you about just the cornerback situation in general, because I know we've been talking all week about it, but the latest thing on my mind I was thinking about this morning is that, you know, if the Eagles beat the Giants on Sunday, which I think a lot of people expect them to, whether it's the 49ers or the Seahawks, it's going to be a tricky matchup for the Eagles and their cornerbacks, you know, whether they're healthy or not, even if everyone was healthy. So, you know, do you think that there's a situation where the Eagles could use the Giants game as an opportunity to maybe not be experimental, but try guys in different situations to see what they have in front of them, so when they do have the 49ers or the Seahawks in the playoffs, they have maybe more answers or confidence about what they would do with certain guys, whether it's Sidney Jones, Avonte Maddox, etc.?
Well, I think the only one that they're completely confident in is Jalen Mills. So when he's healthy and if he's able to go, I mean, he's the left corner, and that doesn't change. So the right corner, and they've kind of explained, and it is true. I mean, that's been Rasul's spot since the beginning, really dating all the way back to the off season, never mind training camp. That's where he's been stationed. And that's why they put him there. Where Sidney, if you remember, before Jalen Mills was healthy, he was battling with Avonte Maddox for that left corner job. So he had spent the entire summer on the other side. So that kind of explains why they made the decision they made. But I always thought there was going to be a short leash no matter what, as I mentioned, and you kind of go with who's playing well, and Sidney's gaining confidence. He's a more talented player. They've always felt Avonte is best suited in the slot because of his size deficiencies. I think everybody has seen since Creban LeBlanc, there was this weird narrative. I talked about it a lot, like he was a proven player. He was picked up on waivers in November of last year, and he played well down the stretch, and he deserves credit for it. But this isn't Richard Sherman. This isn't Patrick Peterson, and you kind of saw it when he's come back. He's not been effective. So there's not a ton of confidence there. He didn't even play last week for the first time, didn't even get a snap. So they have some issues at corner, and there's not a lot of experimenting you can do. You're not going to fix it in Week 17 of the NFL season. You just got to try to cobble your way through and win a football game. And then you're already in survive and advance mode. So there's not going to be a lot of let's try this and see if the light goes off. For the vast majority of these players, with the exception of Sidney Jones, who has some talent, it kind of is what it is, and you just try to get through it.
We just had Emery Hunt on of The Athletic, and I asked a similar question, but I want to get your opinion on this. Do the Eagles focus on slowing down Barkley like they did with Zeke, forcing Daniel Jones to have to throw on them? The only thing that scares me is with these corners, specifically on the road, that kind of concerns me, but I don't know how there would be another way to really approach it.
No, there isn't. I mean, that's their best player, Saquon Barkley, by a wide margin. It's not close. This is one of the top playmakers in football when he's healthy. Hasn't been healthy for the majority of the season. Unfortunately for the Eagles and the Redskins last week, he is healthy, and he's finally gotten healthy late in the season, and he's looked like himself. So, yeah, it starts with him. And you just look at it. I mean, he always – it's the really Bill Belichick mentality. You always try to take away the best player and force a lesser player to beat you. And if they do, you kind of tip your cap. And that's where the Eagles are. I mean, yeah, they're going to do everything possible to stop Saquon Barkley and force Daniel Jones to beat him. And he played great in Washington, but he's a rookie player. He's prone to turnovers. Nobody fumbles more than Daniel Jones. People think Carson Wentz fumbles. Wait till you see this kid. There's a lot of ball security issues. So, I mean, there's no other way to go. You're not trying to stop Daniel Jones and let Saquon Barkley beat you. That would be dereliction of duty. And people who criticize Jim Schwartz would have a right to criticize Jim Schwartz at that point.
Speaking of that, John, you led right into my question, which is, what are your expectations for what Jim Schwartz will do against a rookie quarterback? We know, as you mentioned, Daniel Jones does have a turnover issue. We know that Jim Schwartz has a very good record. In fact, there's very few defensive-minded coaches in the NFL who have better records versus rookie quarterbacks than Jim Schwartz. So what are your expectations for Schwartz versus the Giants' young quarterback?
Yeah, he took a little bit of a hit because Dwayne Haskins played so well against the Eagles. And they were a little bit passive against Haskins. And I think they went in with the thought process that he's probably not going to be able to hurt us. I don't know if he can do that with Daniel Jones, but I think the goal shifts here because you have Saquon Barkley, and what you want to do is obviously stop the run and force Jones to be in third and long situations. And then the pass rush has a chance to get home. and he's a guy who's going to hold on to the football, doesn't necessarily, like most young quarterbacks, trust what he sees. So he's susceptible to that extra tick, and that's when you fumble. And that's what's happened. And he hasn't processed quickly enough. So the Eagles see that on film. He's also coming off his best game as a pro. And he does have talent. And when he does get hot, this is better than Dwayne Haskins. This is a guy that can gash you. So he's dangerous, but you also don't want to overstate it. You'd rather face Daniel Jones than, throw out the name. And some of the playoff quarterbacks you're going to see if you make the playoffs, they're all better. This is not one of the best quarterbacks. He might be 3 years from now, but he's not right now. So I think some people at least are kind of overstating the danger. I will say that.
Speaking of the danger, you led me into another question I wanted to ask you, John. I feel like we're on like a mental simpatico right now. But we were asking earlier, if the Eagles make the playoffs, who would you rather face? Would it be the 49ers or the Seahawks? And I wanted to bring that question to you because Deshaun says he'd rather face the 49ers because he is more afraid of Russell Wilson than Jimmy G. I feel like I would rather the Seahawks because they're so banged up. No Dwayne Brown. They're basically pulling guys off the street to play running back. So, John, from your perspective, what would be a better matchup for the Eagles?
Yeah, no doubt the Seahawks at this stage, for the reason you said, they're just so banged up. I mean, it looks like 2014 from the running back situation. And this was one of the best running teams in football when you had Chris Carson, Rashad Penny. And now they're down to, as you mentioned, bringing Marshawn Lynch back and crossing their fingers. So Russell Wilson's great, second in the MVP voting to Lamar Jackson. So I get a lot of people want to boil it down to quarterbacks. He's much better than Jimmy Garoppolo. But you could argue that 49ers team from 1 through 53 could be the most talented team in football. That doesn't match up well with the Eagles. It doesn't match up well with anyone. You can cross your fingers and hope Jimmy Garoppolo has a bad game, but that's sort of what you're hoping for because the rest of the team is going to beat you pretty good. So you're kind of hoping the quarterback, what's the bed, and that's not a position I ever want to be in.
Now that we're starting to talk about some other teams, there is some news going around the NFL today, and it looks like Antonio Brown has a workout with the New Orleans Saints. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Saints clearly think the championship window is open. Remember, they also picked up Janoris Jenkins off waivers. So they're trying to go for it. But they kind of know, and I've said this before, Antonio Brown's not playing this season. So, and I've said this with the Eagles fans who claim that the Eagles should sign him. The reason he's not on the commissioner's exempt list is because he's not a part of the NFL. If someone signs him, he's going on that list immediately. He is not going to play again this season. And the Saints are already starting to back off because they've probably gotten that word. They're probably hoping something might have changed, but the NFL is letting teams know he's not going to be able to play. So you can sign him, but the investigation, he's not going to be able to play until that's over.
Yeah, the Saints, John, they made it out to be, whether it's Schefter's report or Sean Payton in his press conference this afternoon, they meant, we're doing our due diligence. They brought in a bunch of other guys too. I kind of get the feeling, though, John, how much of this with Antonio Brown is really even about this season? How much of it could be, in the future because of the fact that, whenever Antonio Brown's situation is cleared up, whether that's some points off season or early next season, we've seen the Saints already take a chance on Des Bryant before. Could this maybe be in that mold?
Yeah, I don't think it was. At the onset, I think they were hopeful. As I said, they think they're very close. And I agree with them, by the way. I think they might be the favorites in the NFC, especially if they can get a first-round bye, because it's almost impossible to win there at the Superdome. But we'll see how things shake out. So I do think they're very close. They have struggled to get that complement to Michael Thomas, and you could argue that he doesn't need a compliment because he's the only guy in football. Everybody in the stadium knows he's getting the football all the time, and nobody can stop him. So I don't even know if they need him, but Antonio's a great player. I think everyone understands that. Everyone understands he can still play. He's not going to be happy as being a second fiddle. I can guarantee you that. So I don't necessarily like that fit.
John, you mentioned the Saints. Which of those teams, the Saints, the 49ers, the Packers, do you think which of those three teams has the best chance of the teams that have a chance at getting the first? I know the Seahawks do as well, but I think most of us assume the 49ers are going to beat the Seahawks. Which of those teams do you think has the best chance in the NFC of reaching the Super Bowl?
Well, I think the Saints are the most well-rounded team. I do think the big question mark with the 49ers is obviously the quarterback, and he's never performed at that type of level. I think Green Bay's been that team all year, really until last week. They just dominated Minnesota. That's probably the best game they played all year. I've got the feeling they've won a lot of games they shouldn't have. So I'm not necessarily as high on the Packers as others are. I think the Saints are the best team in the NFC. A lot of it has to do, though, if they don't get a first-round bye, that makes things more difficult. I think if they do get a first-round bye, I think they're the clear front runners.
He is John McMullen. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen for all your Eagles and NFL news and updates. Football at 4 every day here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Don't miss him on Countdown to Kickoff this Sunday. Tony Bruno and the gang, Tollman Joe's. John will be joining them as well as he does. Check out all of his work at 97.3 ESPN.com. John, hope you have a good weekend, and hopefully Sunday is good to you.
I hope so. I got to be up in North Jersey, so that part's not going to be good. But hopefully the Eagles come home with a playoff berth, and we get an extra week of football.